So I am Mehmet Celik, and we are going to talk about tests. I'm taking the Primo NUI as an example, but as long as it's a web application, you can just mimic it on all sorts of things. So I am working for the University of Leuven. Oh, sorry, for the department LIBIS. So we are a part of the KU Leuven University libraries. And we have been, or the university at least, has been around since 1425. And we, LIBIS, have also been around for a long time, 40-something years. And we provide services to the university and associated colleges. So, but we also provide services and consultancy on practically all ex-Libris products to external organizations. And we were very lucky that Oxford and Cambridge and ZBL from Switzerland asked us to help them with their Primo implementation. So today we mainly focus on the big three, Alma, Rosetta, Primo. But before we start, so I'm going to put on our other hat now. I'm also the coordinator of the interoperability working group. And the interoperability working group is going to change. So more on that tomorrow. My co-chair is sitting right here, Lucas. Everybody knows Lucas. But I also have to say that the talk of today has links to what I'm going to say tomorrow. So I would say come and see tomorrow. But the main thing is our mission is going to change for the interoperability group, and let's see what's going to happen. We will be more developer focused, and this is one of the developer things today that I'm starting, but more on that tomorrow. But also, if you're a functional person, sorry that I call you functional. It doesn't mean that I am dysfunctional because I'm a developer. But what I mean is people who know the domain a lot better than I do and can translate the domain a lot better to us technical people. They are also very welcome to join us because this is the yin and the yang thing. So one does not exist without the other. We need both teams or both sorts of people there to create things. I don't know if the IGeLU application already contains my presentation examples, but these are two links. So it's lib.is, libis, and then the extension to E2. P is the presentation, and one ending with the E is a GitHub repository. Because we will try to do some I'm not going to call it coding, scripting thing to do with testing. So I like communities, and I had one idea. I have a lot of ideas. Most of them are bad, so we'll see what this one is about. Community-based tests. So tests. What? So what do I mean with this? So let's first draw a context so we all know what this talk is about. If you look up testing in software testing on Wikipedia, you see something like software testing is an investigation conducted to provide stakeholders with information about the quality of the software product or services under test. When I read this, I don't know how your feeling is to all these words like investigation, stakeholders, quality. I get scared, really I do. But that's probably because I also have this imposter syndrome, and that I think, well, somebody is going to figure me out, that I actually don't know anything about these things. So, but probably these words are put there for management. They have a better understanding of these words, and it sells. Huh? So that's what you have to do to convince a manager. Use expensive words. But when I read this, I translate into this. Check if your software works. So software testing is see if things just work. And not today, but also that things keep working in the future. Very important. But I also have to say, testing is hard. It's very hard. Everybody who has done some QA knows that it has a lot of moving parts, and that the eye of the beholder changes the focus and the outcome of your tests. So it depends on who looks at your product and to discover other problems or other patterns. So what do we investigate then? Do we investigate the code? Do we investigate the code of Primo? Do we investigate its APIs? Do we investigate the functionality? Because code and functionality is not the same thing. Do we investigate accessibility or the overall quality of the application? Personally, I do not think that these are our responsibility, to be honest. So I do not think we should test the code, because whoa, what's happening? Because that's already been done by LIBIS, I hope. They do unit. I hope they do unit tests and integration tests. But we will also not test the standard functionality, because, as you know, it takes a very long time to get a feature into a product. So let's assume that these features, new features, are well tested by the vendor and their focus groups. Yeah. Although we should be testing the functionality that we implement on top of it. So if you create a new component for Primo, for a new UI, then you should test it, of course, which is obvious. And I don't think we should also test accessibility, at least not accessibility on its own. So it will be part of our test, but it won't be a test on its own. So again, I'm hoping that all these things are done by the vendor. So what do we test then? You might wonder. So if everything is already tested, what's our part? Why do we complain every release when a comma changes, or when a button moves, or when there is a different reaction on some action you perform? So I think that we should test flows, because that's what our end users do. They go through a certain flow. They start up the application, and they do their searches, go to their favorites, log in, log out, and so on and so on. Test must be, so these are three things that actually more or less mean the same thing. Deterministic. You should be able to repeat them, consistent. Doesn't matter when you test, should always give this the same result, and they should be reliable. It's not that you can say, well, I need to test this in the morning, because if I test it in the afternoon, I won't be able to test because the system load is too high, or whatever. So we don't care about those things, although we should maybe, but we don't care. And even to make it worse, testing of a GUI is even harder than just software testing. Because what I want to say with this is the amount of additional operations to test functionality is not proportional, is that it is not directly proportional. Most of the time, you need to perform, for example, multiple clicks to test just one function. But we have, luckily, a new generation of tools that helps to do these things. And one of these tools is Cypress. I don't know if anybody heard anything or does know Cypress or read something about it. But I guess everybody has heard or knows Selenium. Selenium is a software testing tool that you can drive web browsers with. But Cypress is not a tool like Selenium, although it's for testing, but it's nothing like. Cypress, to start with, runs totally in your web browser. So you don't have a server component that drives your browser. It is in your browser. It only supports Chrome for the moment, but as I said, we're not testing the application as such. We're testing flows. So that should be okay. And the nice thing about Cypress is that you have direct access to the application that's being tested. So you can open your console, and you can start doing stuff. Console, I mean your developer console. And you can stop the application at a certain point in your debugger, and so on. So it's totally JavaScript-based. It's easier to debug because you have access to the DOM. You can create snapshots, screenshots. You can even record your whole session. So you can share with others what you've been doing or where you think stuff goes wrong. Because the problem we always have is certain things are just not repeatable. We get error messages in our help desk saying, well, this didn't work because of this and this. And if you try to mimic or try to test it on your own environment, it's not behaving the same way for some unexplainable reason as it is at the person who's complaining about a certain problem. And the testing, so the creating the code, creating the tests is pretty easy and pretty good to understand because it has great documentation for developers and also for, sorry to call you functional again, for functional people. So people who know the domain, who know what they are talking about. So the last line is technical. Nobody cares about Wuchai and Chai. So it's based on that. Two well-tested frameworks. But again, it is just a tool, and a tool is not solving your problems. It's helping to solve your problems. So you still need to understand what you're doing. So I want to show you now how easy or difficult it is to create a simple test within Cypress. That means that I'm going to stop doing this and start mirroring my display. So things may go kaboom now. No, okay. All right, so let's make this bigger. Is this readable? Okay. So to start from scratch, what we'll do is, so we have our command line. Sorry for the command line. But it's necessary in the beginning. So what I'll do is I'll just create a simple directory called test. Go in there. I'll initialize my project with Yarn, but you can also use npm or whatever package manager there is. So everything is JavaScript. And what this does is something very simple. It just creates one file. And now we're going to populate the file a bit. So I'm going to install the Cypress environment. And this, unfortunately, takes it some time. There it is. And what Cypress does, so I'll open my code editor now. What Cypress does is, make this bigger too, is it says I'm a definite dependency, and that's the version that I installed. So the next time, if you work with multiple people, they just have to type yarn, and everything is installed by itself. So that's that. What we'll now do is we'll add a script tag here, and then say that we want to create a new command called cypress, and we want to start cypress. So this is done. When I go back to my command line now, or I don't have to be here, I can just, maybe that's easier. I can just type it in here. So I can now say yarn cypress, and cypress will start. It will open a window, and what it will do is it will create some directories for you. These directories contain examples. So if you, for example, use this one, it will start up your web browser, and it will start doing your test. You see it typing, and on the left side, you see if the test is successful or fails. And the nice thing about these tests is that once they're done, you can open them up, and you can go to every specific point in the flow. So, for example, here, or here, or here, or here. I see stuff changing on the screen. So I think that this is a great way of testing flows, actually. So let's try to create one simple test ourselves. If I go back to my editor, we see that this directory is there. It contains these integrations. I'll just create a new folder and call it Primo. And I'll create a new file saying flow1 spec.js. So this is the beginning of our test. And since it's already designed on certain principles like Mucha and Chai, we can use those tests. I believe there are other people who are doing test-driven development and so on. So this is comparable to those things. So we can describe some test, and the editor, your code editor, just says what you have to do. You have to provide description. So we'll call this Primo. And we need to define a function. So, and that's basically almost all the coding you need to know. And we have to say that we want to do stuff. Like, for example, I would like to visit our Primo environment. Search, and then, no, it's not search, it's explore. Search fit equals kdoc. So this is one of our Primo views. And when I save this and go to my console here, we'll see it's rather small. I cannot make it bigger. That it fails, which was not the idea. This is because we need to say what it needs to do. So we should say it should handle simple flow, for example. And we need to create this function thing again. Function. And move it in here. So when I save now, and we go to this browser, it says this. Why? Because we have Wi-Fi. So what does it say? Help. The URL is correct, right? Ah, yeah, well, you're right. So, after delay, we get to our homepage for this library. We also see all the other requests that are going on in the background, and we see that slowly our page is actually being built. And you also see at the bottom it's rather small, but you see the phase before the request and the phase after the request is done, so when you got the response. And you also see that this one, for example, loading the library logo fails. You get a 404. I'm not sure if I can make this bigger too. Yeah. So you get a 404, which says this resource is not loaded for some reason. You can go in there, and it will give you a bit more information on these resources. There's already one thing that we can look at and see why this is not working, because it's loading a custom image, so it's probably something we did wrong. So what we'll do now is we'll say, we'll just check if the URL is actually loaded. Maybe I should have done this test before. And just saying, well, the URL should exist, so there should be a URL in there that makes sense for the web browser. And once that's done, what we'll do is we'll just say type some words. So type water, and press enter afterwards. Still too small? So our test would be, or our flow would be, go to this KDoc view and see if the URL is correct, if it exists, and type water and press enter. Very easy to understand. If you go to our test, it fails. It says it's not possible because you require a DOM element. So what did we do wrong? Does anybody know? I read my script wrong. So we should actually say this. We should look for an element on screen, and getting this element is actually pretty easy. So if we go to the last row in our test, and we click this selector button, we can just hover over the element, and it says, well, this is the search bar. When you click it, it appears here. You can say just copy this into the clipboard, and we can just paste it inside our test. So and for our URL thing, we can say, well, I only want to continue if my URL contains a certain word, namely lang, because as you see, I do not provide a language here, and if you look very carefully in our test, we'll see that the URL gets rewritten. We get a new URL, and in this new URL, the lang parameter is added up here. So the URL should contain a specific parameter. Then get the search bar. It should exist to start with, because else it doesn't make sense to type something in there. And then enter the word water and press enter. if this goes well, you should see that it did search. We have our result set. And now we can start doing stuff on the result set. So what would somebody do? Somebody would probably get one of these records and click on them. Huh? So let's see if this works, because the selector thing does not always work that well. So if we take, for example, the fourth record, we can try to do this. So we can copy the record. We'll change it later to make it more generic, of course, because this might not be the fourth record the next time we do the test. So we're saying, well, get this record with that specific ID. And what do you think that we should add now? We'll add the command click, the most obvious one. And if everything goes correctly now, we should get this fourth record. Ta-da! Well, something's happening. Huh? So creating tests like this for a developer is a great tool. For somebody, for somebody with a domain background, maybe that's a better word, is also pretty easy. You just need to know a small vocabulary, and you can start creating your tests. So we can now make this one a bit more generic, and if you know CSS, then you should be able to say, I want to have a div. I want to have a div where my ID should start with search result record ID, and then some number. I will click. I think I need better glasses. Okay. Sorry. We need to take one record out of this, of course. And then we need to click. So our test is still the same, our flow is still the same. So what a user would normally do is he would click probably on multiple records, so you could implement that. Or he clicks on these arrows to go to the previous or to the next record, so we could implement that. But we should also check, of course, if what we see on screen is actually the full display. So we could do this, and we already did it up there, and hopefully we'll do it right this time. So we could take the URL, and it should contain singular or plural, doesn't matter. What should it contain? Do you know? It's up here. So it's the full display. So it should contain full display. So let me write it incorrect. So I'm missing the A. So see what happens with the test. So it says there's a search bar. I'm looking for a URL, should contain full display, and it says, oh no, what's happening? I expected it to include full display, but it's not there because I've written it wrong. And Cypress, after a while, says, well, the URL is not changing to what I'm expecting, so I'll just stop. So if we write this correctly and look at the test again, This time it finds the keyword in the URL and says, okay, this is the full display. You are correct. And Primo is a bit slow, but that's nothing new. That's it. This is a very simple flow test. We can expand it to do other things like go to the next record, for example. That requires a bit more CSS knowledge, but isn't that difficult at all. But what I'll do right now is I'll just tell the system not to do web authentication, but just to wait for 5 seconds, because we saw that the build-up was pretty slow, and after 5 seconds to go out and press the next record button. So when the 5 seconds are passed, we'll run a new function saying that we'll get this new component. Reference to the new component being this bit of CSS. It has to be a button with a label or with an attribute called ngClick. And the ngClick needs to say controller get next record. And once you have this, click it. Yeah. So let's see what that does. So we go through the whole test again. We visit the page. We do some simple checks. We wait 5 seconds. And then we click. And we go to the next document. You see that the image disappeared. And we get also a new title. So what we could do now is could check if the title is there, the stuff that we expected. So, but you do see that this is very dumb, and this is not reusable. If we wanted to do this in a community environment, we need to make sure that this can be used by everybody. So the first thing that we will do is to split this up. How much time do we have? Still enough time, 20 minutes. So the next thing that we will do is we'll split this up and make this more generic. Yeah? So that if you download the test from the GitHub repository, you can just say, well, these are my parameters. This is my base URL for my Primo. This is my view. Run the test, run the flow. And if there are certain flows which are different in your system, and I'm 100%, no, I'm even 1000% positive that some things will break in your view, even in our views, and because we do stuff different for certain views. So if I would change our vid to KU Leuven UX, for example, you will see that this test will not work anymore. Yeah? So the current test that we've written here is pretty fragile. Yeah? You see that it says, well, it's not coming. I mean, what are you trying to do? It doesn't work, yeah? Because we are doing stuff differently for this view. That's what happens when you start hacking. That's what happens when Libris gives you the tools to do some hacking, which is a good thing. Yeah? But we need to keep this in our back of our minds that if we want to create tests, that they should be more or less generic. Everything which is specific for your institution should be your own extension, basically, on what there is in the community environment. So my idea, maybe it's dumb, maybe it's too early, I don't know. My idea is that we as a community should start doing these focus group thing under the umbrella of the interoperability or whatever work group. And there's a couple of people being, functional, so domain persons with domain knowledge, and technical who can do the the difficult things like finding out the CSS selectors and so on, should come together, discuss how we can create these flows, because I think it's important that these things can be run regularly, and that maybe that Ex-Libris is also interested enough to support this, so they can already warn us before a new version comes out. I know that they have this Primo QA environment, but let's see. Let's have a look at this environment. The problem with this Primo QA environment, especially if a new release has been released, is that this thing breaks. It doesn't work for a couple of days. So let's see if it's fixed now. But you see it's stuck. So we could not use the default Primo QA environment because they do upgrades. Luckily, they do upgrades on this environment. So we could not use this directly to do our tests because it would stop now. And all our flows that we come up with, we'd not be able to continue them. So I think it's better to do these QA stuff on your own environment because you have your own needs. The main flow will always be there, will always be the same for everybody. But then there are these dots and commas and notches that you create on your own environment that makes it specific and very important for you. So my hope is that we as a community of domain-specific people and developers can come together at certain points. We'll come together virtually, of course, on our WebEx and think about these things and create these flows for others to use so they can help, so we can help each other, basically. That's it. It isn't that difficult. And the idea is, if you come tomorrow to the interoperability workgroup business meeting, I will try to explain what our goal is for the next coming year, is to do more of these things. And we will also do WebEx sessions that explain how these tools work. So you can become smarter. I will become smarter. We all, as a group, can become smarter and help each other to accomplish simple things like testing flows. And maybe we don't know what will come out of it. Do other stuff. So that is the story I wanted to give, just to tell you. If you go to the GitHub website, it also has another flow, which is a bit more structured than what we did here. So if there are any questions that you are wanting to ask, I'm here.
Hi. Is it possible to run the tests from the command line, or
yes.
Can we? Okay. Yes. So we can integrate the tests into our build scripts.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I haven't covered that, but that is the idea. So they also have a dashboard where you can do the whole integrated testing thing. So build, test, and then send out the outcome. So if tests fail, you can instruct it to create snapshots. Screenshots, or even record the whole session and have it there for you in the morning, basically, to go through and see where it failed. And as you already noticed, the error messages are pretty clear. It basically immediately says what you're doing wrong. So yes, it's possible to completely automate it. But if I would have automated this, wouldn't be that attractive.
Sorry, one more question.
Yes.
So I noticed you used a delay in the example code
yes.
we just wrote.
Yes.
Is it possible to only execute the function if the element is visible? So if the
yes.
button element becomes visible in the
yes.
browser, then okay,
yes.
that's cool.
It is possible, but let's not forget what we're dealing with here. This is Angular.js, Angular 1.6 or 7. I don't know which version it is at the moment. it works differently. It has this virtual DOM. Stuff happens, and sometimes, sometimes it just times out because Primo is, sorry to say this again, in certain environments or in certain moment of the day, slow to render. It could be the amount of memory that you're using at that moment or whatever, but it takes time. So that's why I use this simple method, just wait for it. It will come because the end user is doing the same thing, waiting. But you could say, you could just hook into the AngularJS process and say, wait for this component to be rendered, and then go on. So that would be the clean way of doing it. But this is a simple test. So the next time we will hopefully meet each other online, we will talk about these things and try to make it more robust. Because that's what testing is about, knowing that the next time you run it, you'll get the same result. And with this, at this moment, with the simple thing, you won't get the same result, trust me.
Thank you.
No problem. Anybody else? Let me ask you a general question. What do you think about testing flows? Or are you saying, no, we should not test flows because we should test functionality?
So I'm from the University of Manchester, and a lot of our image machines still use Internet Explorer. So we find, so we find that we get a lot of problems, especially with the application.
Mm-hmm.
So ideally, our tests would also test cross-browser.
Mm-hmm.
So we would get all the versions that
Mm-hmm.
we currently use on our images, and we'd want the tests to run on each browser version. So we use like Selenium with scripts to. We're hoping to utilize a platform called Browser Stack. We recently got a subscription to that, so we're hoping to automate all of our tests and run them in different environments and find out what goes wrong. This seems very usable, but ideally we would want to ensure that the application runs on all of the possible browsers.
Yeah, today, well, this Cypress thing only runs on Chrome, but then doesn't it feel wrong that you, as a customer, have to do all these tests?
Yeah, it does.
That's what I think too, actually, and I think we can make it better through the community. LIBIS is probably doing these tests, but we also know that sometimes, like for accessibility, for example, they are really put somebody behind the keyboard and say, do these accessibility tests, and as we all know, accessibility within Primo isn't that great. I mean, if you have some visually, if you're visually impaired or whatever, then you really have a hard time working with the system. Well, maybe that could be one of the tracks that we can do in our testing group.
Yeah, I think the community source test scripts is a great idea. How would you plan on us sharing our tests?
Well, my idea is, I don't know if you know the Show&Tells that happen.
I'm not familiar.
There is, let me show you. So there is this, if you go to the IGeLU site, if you get there, and if you go to the special interest groups, there is a Show&Tell, well, it's small. There is this Show&Tell tab. And what we've been doing as a special interest groups all together is trying to teach or help the community. So it's a system that works both ways, of course. How certain things work within the XLibris ecosystem and how to deal with stuff. So, for example, next week there is a presentation on making linked data. So these are people who are living linked data day in, day and night. It's not always connected to XLibris products, but most of them are. And the idea is to do these show and tells as a community with certain key people, which will be, how shall I say, on the panel in the discussion, and these things get recorded to YouTube, so people can view it afterwards. So and everything we do will be on GitHub, basically. Now it's on my account, but we'll move it to the IGeLU or Illuna or whatever account, and these key people will have direct access to these repositories, and so they can do their thing.
With the advent of Primo Studio, it would also be really cool to see tests for each customization, so the community-given customizations.
Yes.
Because, like you said, each institutional or customizations are really different. So just including these add-ons may break something. So having tests for each one would be great. Also, just a comment.
That's a great idea. Yeah. And anybody else with ideas, comments? Then we have 5 minutes to spare. Okay. You want to talk about something else? How was your trip? Okay.
So this is a comment/question. You mentioned earlier that really it should be the vendor's responsibility to do all these tests rather than our responsibility. And yet we are responsible, for our users to have a good experience with the product. And so we do the test. For example, at my consortium, every time there is a Primo new release, we have it on the sandbox. All of the institutions are encouraged to do basic functionalities testing, and share whatever problems we discovered, and then we vote whether we move the product on, on the production. And it seems like if we had more automated tests, we wouldn't have to take that much staff time to do this, and that would be the same for accessibility.
Yes. Yes. You've worded it perfectly. So it's probably my lack of English knowledge but that's exactly what I'm saying. We also do tests. So next week we will be doing tests on the new UI for the August release. But the problem with these things is you always start from zero. So you have to put somebody in front of the PC. They need to open the web browser, and then they need to follow the script, or if it's not scripted, do other kinds of tests. But you lose a lot of time with stuff which is, which you're almost certain of will always work. So if you have these automated flows, then you can already have one pass of the whole flow of your whole workflow, and only get things which are different, broken, or
new.
Or new, So they will pop up immediately, and that's why I'm also saying if XLibris could also somehow sponsor this with knowledge, for example, or with guidance, because they do a lot of great things there. But personally, and this is my own opinion, I think that they are doing so much things that they sometimes are getting lost themselves. So, and if we could all work together to come up with with basic flows which are there, which everybody can use. Then we can all focus on the specific things for our own institutions, our own environments, and we don't need to deal with all the stuff which is the same every release anyway. So we only want to have the oddities, the new stuff that's changed. Yeah.
And about the earlier idea that I really like, the customizations there being uploaded into Primo Studio,
yeah.
It would be nice if there was an automated way of testing those customizations before everybody else implements them. If there, for example, are accessibility problems with those. You know, it's nice to implement new customization, it's great, and then you realize, oh, there are problems with accessibility, and then you're trying to figure out, is it Exlibris or is it us?
Yes.
Who did that?
Yes, we could, since the Primo Studio thing is now pushed into the community by Exlibris, which I think is a great idea. So it's maintained by the community anyway. So we could, we had a couple of discussions on this. How do we enforce people to write tests for their code? But this could be one of the guidelines. So we could say, well, we will not incorporate your component unless you have one of these flow branches that somebody can just link to within their testing flow, so that they don't need to reinvent the wheel, because
exactly.
that is the problem of all of us. We all are doing exactly the same thing, but unfortunately we're doing it differently. Mm-hmm. Yeah? So if there would be a base, then it would help everybody. So I completely agree. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, hello. Quick question. We are implementing Primo next week. We started the project basically before I left, and it's only me who's doing the implementation. It's a one-man show, our library network. And how much time do you need to invest in order to create those workflows? Because basically what we do, since we are a very small team, we implement a system, let's say the new Aleph version in our case, and I just write some basic protocols and we check the functionality. Mm-hmm. Do you need to invest a lot of time? Does it worth the effort? That's my question.
You probably already know the answer. So the idea is to do this as a community. So everybody would invest a small amount of time, or smaller amount of time, and of course, as you said, this is an investment. So you're expecting some return of an investment. You know? Yeah. So the idea is, okay, the amount of time you're investing will be a bit more in the beginning, but the return should be greater. And since we are doing this as a community, you will have other people who are further down the road than you are, or than I am, who would say, well, watch out, we have already tried that way, and it doesn't go for us, it doesn't work for us. So maybe it will work for you, because as I said, we're all doing the same thing, but differently. So yeah, it will be an investment, but if it will be a small investment compared to if you have to do everything by yourself. Today you'll be in the work group doing flow X, and somebody is doing flow Y, and you can benefit from things that somebody else has done already. And just do your own thing on top of it. So I think it's important to have this base layer of tests, so everybody can benefit, and not only because I know there are people who are already doing these kinds of things, but they're for some reason keeping it for themselves. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah.
Thanks. Is there a possibility to run it with a Linux server without the X server, so like Selenium with Phantom GS?
Yes. Yeah, you can do it completely headless. So,
okay, that sounds great. Thanks.
I used this Electron application just to make it more visual.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. But you don't need to have a browser, so you don't need the X Windows or whatever. Or it's can be run. It's like Phantom GS basically. Okay, I think it's 11 o'clock now. Thank you. If you have questions, what I will do is I will post invitations on the Slack channel and on the different working groups to one, if you're interested in helping out and lending your expertise, then you're definitely welcome. So that will be one invitation. And the other invitation will be for everybody to make us all smarter. So how do we do these things? How do we test Angular components? How do we test the flow with Angular components? And so on. So those will be the two invitations you will see. But give me some time, because it will be in September, so end of September or so. Yeah, thank you.